In my last video, I went through the steps of creating a basic rock sound, which was also my first preset on the Quad Cortex. In this video, I'm going to show you how I built that out to be basically a one-size-fits-all rig, all in one preset. Traditionally, with multi-effects boxes and amp modelers, you set up a preset for each individual sound. You got your clean preset, your dirty preset, your crunch and lead presets, and so on. Modern devices like the Quad Cortex have introduced a new paradigm called scenes, which is basically a way of storing snapshots of the devices in your virtual rig. Now, the idea isn't exactly new, but the insane processing power of the Quad Cortex allows us to take this to a whole new level. Let me show you what I mean. I started with the preset that I built in my last video, which is a cool crunch and lead sound. It sounds like this. Because this unit is so powerful, I can have multiple amps and speaker cabinets and effects configurations all saved in one preset and then switch between them at will. I'll start with the clean sound. Now, for cleans, I love a Fender Deluxe Reverb. I own a 68 Custom Deluxe that I used for a few years as my main gigging amp, and during that time, I fell in love with those slightly gritty Fender cleans. So I'll switch over to Cortex Control and show you what I did. Okay, now the first thing I did, since I love a Deluxe Reverb, I added the US Deluxe Normal, which is basically the normal channel of Deluxe Reverb. Now, I've got the volume set at 2 so that it stays pretty clean, and then everything else is just basically flat. Now, for a speaker cabinet, I didn't want to go with the typical Deluxe Reverb 112 cabinet, but I also didn't want the bulk of a 412. I wanted to go with a 212, so I scrolled through the list and I found that the 212 UK C30 GB69, which is basically a Vox 212 with greenbacks, sounds really good combined with the Deluxe Reverb, so I chose that. Now the mics are a Dynamic 57, which I have just over a little bit from center, and then the Ribbon 160, which I've got over as close to center as I can get it. I've also got some chorus on here. So this is what that sounds like. Now that sounds great, but we got a long way to go. When I was using my Deluxe as my main rig, I always had an MXR Dynacomp at the front of my signal chain. Now, the Quad Cortex doesn't have the model of a Dynacomp in it. On the website, it says it's planned, but they just haven't done it yet. Hopefully, they'll get to it soon. So I put in the Jubilee compressor, which is basically a model of the Diamond compressor pedal. Turn that on. And I kept everything right around 6. So I'm going to turn this off, play a little bit, and then turn it on. Already that made a huge difference. It boosted the signal going into the amp a little bit, which got those virtual tubes cooking and just made it sound a little more even and more clear. And I think that sounds great, but you know me, I got to tweak it. Now, I wanted to add some additional EQ, but I didn't want to mess with the EQs I had set with the other settings because I'm new to this unit and I'm bound to mess something up. So instead of doing that, I added another parametric 8-band EQ. On band 1, I've got that set. It's a low shelf at 99 hertz, and I've got that boosted 1.4 dB. That gives me just a little more thickness to the sound. On band 2, I wanted some more, those really low mids, so I set this as a bell curve at 169 hertz, and I've got that boosted 3.6 dB. Now up here on band 5, I've set the frequency to 1.5K, and I've got that boosted just like a half a dB. So I'm going to play without the EQ on, and then I'll turn it on. Now, it's not a huge difference. It's actually pretty subtle. But at least to my ears, those changes thicken the sound a little bit and help it to sit really well in a mix. Now, the other EQs that I added for the crunch and lead sound, I've got those turned off. I'm not using those, but I do have my tilt EQ on. That's a little trick that I talked about that I learned from Jason Sudeikis. I'll leave a link to his YouTube channel down in the description. But basically, I have two bands set up. Both of those are centered at 650 hertz. One of them is a low shelf, one of them is a high shelf. So it allows me to kind of just fine-tune the highs and the lows. I've got that one on. I've got the lows up, everything below 650 hertz up 2 dB. On the third band, which is also 650 hertz, but it's a high shelf, I've got that boosted 1 dB. This is an extremely subtle change, but it makes a difference. Now, there's a particular clean sound that I typically go for, and this pretty much nails it. Okay, so now I also need a slightly dirty sound, something I can use for a bluesy tone or a semi-clean tone where I need just a little bit of grit. For that, I like to use the same amp and speaker combo, so I just moved those over to Scene H. Here's what that sounds like. Okay, so here's how I got there. You see, I've got the same amp and speaker combination. On the amp, I brought the lows up to 6, and I brought the highs up to 5.8. I turned on the drive pedal that I added in the last video, and all I did with that was boosted the volume a little bit just to push the front end of the amp a little bit. And over here on the compressor, the only thing I did, I turned the EQ down a little bit to compensate for where I boosted the highs on the amp. Now, I did turn on the low high cut EQ, got my tilt EQ still. Now, over here on the parametric 8-band, I did change a few things. First off, on my low shelf, I set the frequency to 130 hertz, and then I boosted it up to 4.8 dB, whereas on the clean sound, it was boosted to 1.4 at a lower frequency. I turned off band 2. Band 4 is turned on now, and it's roughly 800 hertz and just a slight boost. Band 5 is about the same. And then band 6 at 2.5K, I've boosted that up a dB and a half. So here's without the EQ. And here's with the EQ. Now, I also need this sound to work for a semi-clean, slightly gritty sound. Actually, when I'm playing gigs, I usually use a sound like this with the volume on my guitar drop back for the majority of my clean stuff, because I do like a little bit of grit in there. So, we go to 4th position on the guitar. And if I switch down to 2nd position, pull up on my coil split, and turn on the chorus, I have that nice jangly 80s kind of sound. That's about perfect. And finally, I needed a kind of bluesy lead tone, something I could jam on, but doesn't sound like I'm playing through a Marshall. So here's what I came up with for that. Now here's how I got there. The first thing I did, I went to the amp and I brought the volume up to 5.1 so I could get that nice edge of breakup sound that a Deluxe gets when you crank it a little bit. Over here on my drive pedal, I brought the volume of the drive pedal up to 8.3 to really push the front end of the amp. And then over here on the
compressor,
I just added a little more compression to smooth it out, just a touch. Now on the parametric, I brought the low shelf down to 2 dB, whereas on the last setting it was up at 4.8. That's the only thing I changed there. And then on my tilt EQ, I set the band above 650 to 0, and that's it. This will be the slightly dirty sound, and I'll switch to the lead sound. Now, what I found also, it's a pretty dynamic sound. You know, if I only go up about halfway on my volume knob, but if I go all the way up on the volume, gives me a sound where I could go relatively low on the volume knob and still get that. Go a little higher. All the way up. So now, if I bring up Gig View, you'll see how I've got everything kind of arranged here. I've got my clean sound. I got my crunch sound. Got a chorus version of that. I got my lead sound. I've got my lead sound with chorus, great for that 80s stuff. We've got the bluesy sound. And then we got the nice bluesy lead. Now, if I switch over to stomp mode, you can see all these other effects that are up here. I've got them assigned to the various switches. So if I want some phaser, I pop that one on. If I want some flanger, I pop that one on. So between the various amps, speaker cabinets, and effects configurations, I've got the equivalent of a fairly large guitar rig all saved in one preset that should work great for live use. So here's one more little tip. I've turned off preset mode. If you're not familiar with that, just go into the settings. You could also do this on the unit, modes configuration. And there would also be a mode here for presets. I've taken that out of there. If I need to add it back, I can always just do that. But I don't want to do that, so I've taken that off. That way, I could just scroll between those two modes. So when I'm playing something in the middle of a song, I don't have to tap dance to get to where I can just turn a certain effect on and off. And that should make things a lot more simple. And if I need to get to a different preset, the bank up and down pedals will scroll me through the presets. And since I'm using scenes for so much of my switching and have stomp mode to fall back on, scrolling through when I need to get to a different preset's not going to be a hassle at all. So there it is, my first preset on the Quad Cortex, and it's a doozy. So many options. But I want to hear how you set your stuff up. Do you use a different preset for each sound, or do you have them all kind of lumped together like I do and use scenes to switch between them? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.